Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to welcome you to this special webcast. This is a preview of the upcoming Entertainment Technology in the Connected Age webcast. I'm your host, Joel Welch, SMPTE's Director of Education. I won't take up too much of your time, but two things that we want to accomplish today is to just give you an idea of what the conference program looks like, but also we have a couple of our speakers who will give us some insight into the actual content that will be covered. And that's where we want to provide our educational value for this webcast. And the speakers that we have today are Pat Griffiths. Pat is SMPTE Executive Vice President and Vice President of Technology at Dolby, followed by Timo Kunkel, who is a staff researcher at Dolby. And then we have Gordon Castle. Gordon is Vice President and Head of Strategy Development at Media and IoT. Pat, I would like to turn the floor over to you. I'm going to go away now. And Pat, the floor is yours.
Folks, good morning. Thanks for joining. Those of you out there in the web world. And we'll talk a little bit this morning about this conference, Entertainment Technology in the Connected Age. And we're now in our 5th year. And what really was the genesis of this conference was where Hollywood meets Silicon Valley. We realized the internet was going to drive the future of entertainment. And this conference is really about entertainment, the web, and trying to bring the forces of Silicon Valley to bear to create that next generation entertainment experience. So what I'd like to do is review quickly the program. It is available online, give you some highlights, and then we're going to give you a sneak and peek teaser on a couple of our interesting sessions in the conference. So let me get going on that. First, on the first day, we'll be kicking off with a session about content creation monetization in a connected world. Clearly, the same set of assets now are delivered via a variety of conduits, the internet not the least of them. And there are some new concepts being discussed about how to create and repurpose assets. And in this session, led by Janet Gardner, we'll talk about some of the technology challenges and how they translate into monetization. And I should mention this conference is really focused on technology and the solutions that are coming about. And it's a case of a virtuous cycle. To some degree, technology is driving entertainment. And of course, entertainment has always been one of the most interesting topics and the biggest user of bits on the internet. So we tend to look at this from what are the big issues? How are the business models changing? And what's the role of technology in all of those? And this session, I'm really looking forward to because Janet's got some exciting ideas about that. Of course, linear, traditional television, we often think of as linear play out. With the advent of the cloud, what happens to linear play out? And in this next session, linear play out from cable to the cloud, we'll be talking about some of the new activities there with some of the market leaders in linear technology who are already beginning to make that migration. We're fortunate to have a keynote from Microsoft Azure Group. As many of you know, Azure is actually Microsoft's cloud-based services operation. And as we see the growth of on-demand programming and, of course, the advent of mobile and the growing proliferation of the cloud, there's an increasing need for video content to be moved closer to the edge to improve the quality of service and quality of experience. And we're fortunate to have Bob DeHaven of Microsoft, who will talk a little bit about some of the things Microsoft's doing there. So it'll be a very interesting keynote. Next one, with the internet crash, if everyone watched the Super Bowl online, that one's almost self-explanatory from a viewpoint. But we will look in this panel at how the internet can scale to match television-sized audiences. And as the internet continues to improve, there is an interesting opportunity there. So that'll be a great panel. Our next one, is there a J&D in it for me? J&D, for those of you who don't know, stands for just noticeable difference. It's been one of the metrics we've used going all the way back to analog television. And in this session, We're going to talk a little bit about some of the new innovations in thinking about that, brought about by the advent of new technology approaches like high dynamic range. And in fact, in this session, we're fortunate today to have Timo Kunkel, who was introduced earlier, and we'll come back and do a little deep dive to give you a teaser, a sneak and peek of some of the topics we'll cover in that panel. So moving on day two, we'll now jump into some of the issues about the new interface technologies, giving voice to video discovery, of course, with things like Alexa, the Infinity X1 cable box with great voice recognition. How is that going to change the interface and perhaps even the technology models as we go forward? So we're pleased to have Colin Dixon from Endscreen Media, who will lead a discussion on that and the impact for content in the connected age. Next, of course, since this is a conference about the internet, what about the plumbing itself, and what's going on there in terms of new technology developments that again could influence the business models? We'll have a panel on adaptive streaming technology, which is one of the mechanisms used today. If you don't know what it is, this is definitely a session for you. We'll talk a little bit about what it means from a technology viewpoint and what new developments are underway that could continue to improve the entertainment experience. Next, keynote from Hanno Basse, who's the CTO at Fox, and Fox is, of course, one of the leading content providers, and they, like anyone else in entertainment, are looking at new ways of delivering their entertainment experiences to consumers. And we're fortunate to have Hanno attend and give us Fox's perspective. And next, IP&D, what's new in 2017? Internet Protocol is sort of the baseline plumbing for the internet. And with the advent of new mobile networks like 5G, which is from the get-go also IP-based, what's the impact as we merge from a wired into a wireless world, and the distinctions between them continue to blur? And we're fortunate to have Gordon Castle from Ericsson, who will lead a panel discussion about what are the differences, how can we compare them, and we'll actually do a little sneak and peek on that panel when I'm done with the overview. Next, of course, everyone's familiar with cloud technology. You may not be so familiar with fog, and fog is sort of a local area variation of cloud. I love the name, and we're going to talk a little bit about how fog interfaces with the cloud. And, whoops, let me go back. Sorry about that. Our last two, and I think perhaps great wrap-up sessions, virtual reality. Of course, it's the hot topic. Many think it's, $13 billion market cap with $0 billion in revenue business. It's still got a long way to go, but there's tremendous interest from the viewpoint of entertainment, and it's definitely an idea who's getting more and more traction. And in this panel, we'll talk a little bit about some of the developments there and speculate on when we'll see something that is even more real. And we wrap up with a view on video compression. Obviously, the biggest user of bandwidth on the internet is video today. And as we continue to evolve with many different delivery mechanisms, in particular mobile, which is even more bit constrained than your wired connection in the home, what new technology innovations are likely to help address that problem? And also, as we look at VR, which is increasing data exponentially, how are we going to deal with delivery of that kind of an experience? And what's the role of the internet in that? So that's kind of a quick walk through the program. You can get more details online. You can also see the program committee and register there. But this year's program, I'm really, really excited about. And one of the things in this conference that I think is also a great benefit is we allow lots of networking time. So between sessions, you have a chance to go and talk to the speakers, get to learn a little bit more, make a lot of new friends who are interested in these same topics. And we will be providing lunch as well as coffee, so you don't have to worry about those things. And being on the Microsoft campus this year, it's a wonderful venue. Parking is easy, and it's hop, skip, and a jump to 101 for those of you in Silicon Valley. So with that, I'd like to do a little sneak peek and give you a teaser on some of the sessions. And to lead off that discussion, I'd like to introduce Timo Kunkel from Dolby's Applied Vision Science Group, and he'll tell you a little bit more about a J&D. Timo, you have the floor.
Thanks, Brad, for the introduction, and again from me, welcome to this webcast. So thanks for inviting me, and it's like I'm just going to give you a bit of a sneak peek, as Pat already mentioned, into our session. So the session is called "Is there a J&D in it for me?" And today I just want to talk a bit about color volumes and their meaning. Basically, how do we compute them? What pitfalls are they if we compute them, and how do we communicate with them? And let's just start with giving you an introduction of what color volumes are. If the slides change. Yeah, now. Okay, so color can be described in a lot of different ways. It's like we know there are lots of different shapes, and the easiest way to actually describe them is if it separate them into 3 dimensions. The first dimension is, as we all know, brightness, so from black to white and all the shades in between. The other 2 dimensions are saturation and hue, as you can see in this illustration here. So basically, if you go from the center to the outwards, it's saturation. And if you go around that circle, it's hue. And with that, we have all the colors in the color wheel, literally. So now these are not 3-dimensional at the moment. The brightness is 1-dimensional, and saturation and hue are 2 dimensions. So if you now add them together, we end up with a color volume. We have 3 dimensions. So the as you can see, it's like you have the intensity axis up and down, and then left and right, and around the circle is saturation and hue. So this is a theoretical explanation of that whole concept. But what if we now go to actual display device? So we can do the same thing here, and we again have our first dimension, which is our brightness here, is an example as a typical gamma curve. And we add that again to our other 2 dimensions, saturation and hue. And here is a typical CIE U prime V prime plot, and with pick one of the typical color spaces, let's say X09 or DCI P3, and you add them together and you get your 3D color volume. So well done, everything worked out, that's great. But is that really that simple? So the problem here is, what model do we use to compute our 3D color volume? And this is a big research topic at the moment, and a lot of investigation happening. But just to give you an idea, these are all color volumes, and as you can see, they all look different. They all have their valid merits and everything. The question now is, which is the best for the application at hand? And obviously we're in entertainment, so we want something that communicates best what we try to communicate with display devices and content delivery. So the question is now, what model should I pick when I compute my color volume? And the question that follows that is, what units should I use if I compute my volume? So let's go back to our display again and just look at that. And we can see, okay, we can compute our color volume, which is like this. And we can compute, because it's a geometric unit, we end up with, let's say, 169 million units of A. I call that A because we need to define that as a unit. Okay, so the second option would be we compute the second type of color volume, as you can see here, and we end up with 25 units of B, because they're different units, because we're using a different color model. Then again, we continue with that logic. We have a third color volume, and we end up with 2.1 million units of, again, a different unit C, because it's again a different model. Or just to complete this, another model with 130,000 units of D. So all these numbers are just for illustration. They don't mean anything here. It's just to bring the point across. But the big question here now is, which of these units are actually meaningful in communicating or reporting, or actually carrying out math with our color volumes? And the next question is now, how do we report these color volumes? So what you normally do if you want to report, you compare your color volumes against a reference. That could be a reference color space, let's say Rec 09 from 0.1 to 100 nits, or SIMD 2084 with Rec 2020 color. Or you define them based on new standards. So this is something needs to be identified, and then how do you compute this and get a comparison? Again, back to our display, and we have again our color volume. That's the same one we started the previous slide. Let's call that A1. So if we compare that against something that is basically the same reference volume, let's say it's a Rec 09 display, then we end up with, if we compute the volume in percent, we end up with about 100%. If we now do the same thing and compare it against, let's say here, Rec 2020, SIMD 2084 container, then we end up with a completely different number, even though we're taking the same input color space, but we compare it against a different reference. And we end up with something, let's say 52%. So if you now go and compare the same color volume A1 against another color volume that's depicted here as B, then as you might guess, this is not really possible. It's like there might be ways of doing some complex math to compare it, but I would advise against. This is not really going to be that meaningful. But another thing that is now important is I can just go and take some other color volume type that is called here C and compare it against reference volume that is also C or close to C, and I end up again with 100%. And the problem with that is now you can see we have two color volumes at the top, A1 against A1 and C against C, and we end up with 2 times 100%. And this is the kind of challenge we have, or risk, is that reaching 100%, if we talk about color volumes, is something that is desirable, but we have to be careful that the thing we compare is actually meaningful. Otherwise, 100% doesn't mean that much. It's like, so what are we comparing against? Is that a standard? Is it meaningful? Is it in any way perceptually correct, or things like that? So this is something that needs to be discussed. And again, as I said, there's a lot of research happening and a lot of debate, and we're hopefully soon coming to the right conclusion. We have some suggestions, and this is something I will discuss further if you join me at the ETCA conference, and I'm looking forward to that. So one other aspect that I just want to get into is, now we talked about the size of the color volume, but the other question is actually the other direction. How many displays, how many colors can I actually show inside of my display? So basically, how many little bits are there that I can distinguish in my display? So the typical approach is that just say it's like, okay, I have an 8-bit system, so 3 times 8 bits. If I compute that, I end up with 16.7 billion colors. Or if I go to 10 bits, then I end up even more with a whopping 1.7 or 7 billion colors. But that's not necessarily meaningful, because this is a signal space. This is what the system can transport, but it doesn't necessarily mean this is what we actually can perceive. So the much better approach is to look into a perceptual space and then check how many colors in that perceptual space can I actually distinguish. And again, this is what we also will go into at the conference. So at the conference, I will explain to you how to define color volumes that are meaningful to image and video display using perceptually uniform color primaries and volumes, perceptually meaningful quantization, the just noticeable differences, as we have in the title. But I will also go further and talk about how we can use those color spaces and GNDs and all these things to depict content colors inside of a color volume that are relevant to the consumer. And how this looks, I'll just give you another sneak peek inside of the sneak peek here. This is our display on the right. It's an HDR display. We have a particular scene on it. And on the left, you can see 2 color volumes. The smaller color volume is of a Rec 09 display. The larger one is an HDR display, basically the one on the right. And you can see this point cloud inside. This is basically that snapshot of that particular scene on the right, showing how this image behaves inside of our color volume. Obviously, the question at the beginning was, is there a JND in from it? And just to give you a hint, yes, there are millions of JNDs in it for you. So join me at the ETCA session. Is there a JND in it for me? And we'll be happy to see you all there. And with that, I just give back to Pat. Thanks.
Thank you, Timo. And now I'd like to turn it over to my colleague, Gordon Castle, who will walk us through some teasers on the IP&V. Gordon, you have the floor.
Great, thank you, Pat. In this session, we're going to talk a little bit. So I'm going to be joined by several great panelists. So Kevin Gage, Executive Vice President and CTO of One Media, part of Sinclair Media Group, and Shelley, Managing Director of Pearl TV, and Steve Reynolds, CTO of Imagine Communications, and Kent Walker, Vice President of Technology at Qualcomm. And really what we're going to talk about here is really the advancements of IP for production and distribution, and what it means and why, right? And so really kind of set up why is that important. Here, a little bit of information just about the changing consumer behavior. And I think we all know that consumers are changing the way they consume content with this desire of sort of reaching this converged media experience, the place where traditional television and over-the-top come together. And really, I think that when we talk about media in a few years, it'll be very hard actually to separate between the two. And part of the trick about that is how can we make the television experience and the online and OTT experience fit together? Is a lot about how it's produced and how it's delivered, and then how it's integrated in consumption. As we look at some of the stats, so we think about that, what does it really mean in terms of a seamless experience? We talk about these converged experiences. It's seamless. It's allowing you to start viewing something in one place and finishing it in another, about taking your TV experience everywhere you go, and that being a personalized experience, utilizing analytics, information, targeting content and data, immersive content, such as ultra high def, HDR, and so forth, and constant evolution. And this is where really the cloud and IP come in as well. As we study at Ericsson consumer behavior and to advance, and so every year we do market research on viewing behaviors and looking at really the changing consumer landscape. And this chart talks about the scheduled amount of time on scheduled television, so what we call traditional television. And you can see that it's still roughly half the overall viewing, although it's been in a mild decline. And areas, such as stream content and mobile content have been rising dramatically. Of course, we kind of expect that. And so the converged experience, then again, is about how to bring those together. And while the overall content is actually going up, so what we see here is kind of a busy chart, and we can go into more detail at the session at Mountain View, is that the overall amount of viewing has actually gone up by an hour and a half a week. But that's coupled together by two things. It's actually a big increase in the amount of on-demand or on-demand content and content by 4 hours a week, and a decline of what we call traditional television by about 2.5. And then there's a difference though between, of course, by age group, and already 50% of millennials are watching on-demand content on a weekly basis. So that gives us to some projections of the future. And what we say there is kind of three statements about the media experience in 2020. One, that 50% of the viewing will be on mobile screens. 50% of the viewing for everybody globally will be on demand. So I pointed out millennials already at that level. And 50% of the viewing on command. What we mean there is that analytics, information, and recommendations are being used to tell you what to watch, as opposed to you searching for content. So these 50-50-50 statements actually give a pretty big difference, to the transformation that's going to happen. That's why I say it's going to be harder and harder to actually tell the difference between traditional television and what we call over-the-top television. It will truly be a converged experience to that point. So in the panel, we'll talk about what things are going on to really enable that. And specifically, especially with a little bit of a US-centric view, we're going to focus primarily on ATSC and 5G. And the ATSC 3.0 standard, which has reached its physical layer approval and is getting huge support. In fact, the FCC Chairman Pai says, call it the first TV standard to marry the advantage of broadcasting the internet. And it's based on internet protocol, or IP, which permits seamless integration with other IP-based platforms. Right, so it's about true IP-based delivery that will open up not only improved ability to do ultra high def to consumers, but also actually allows broadcasters to do data delivery and other services as well. Then we'll also talk a little bit about 5G. And in 5G, we see a huge jump in mobile capacity, opening up better utilization of spectrum through things like beamforming, and also opening up ability to use a wider range of spectrums. So we see things like 1,000 times data volumes increase, 5 times improvement in latency, and the ability to reach 100 times the data rates overall. Because we've demonstrated over 25 gigabits per second in 5G, for example. And so you couple these things together. We're going to talk a little bit about the strengths and weaknesses of each. We're going to talk about the impact on content production and distribution, the new opportunities it provides to broadcasters, and how it's really changing the workflow and opening up new opportunities. And then we're going to talk about how these things can even work together. There's certainly some good ideas about how broadcasting and broadcast signal delivery and over-the-top or internet delivery can work together. So we'll talk a little bit about how these things can work together to enable us to reach this converged experience that we all want to have. So with that, I will hand it back over, but look forward to seeing you in Mountain View.
Thanks, Gordon. So that's kind of a sneak peek, an overview. We hope you can all join us in Mountain View in a little less than 4 weeks. And with that, we'll see, Joel, if you have any questions for us. And of course, since this session is for folks out there, if you have any questions now, please feel free to say them now.
Exactly. And there are no questions in the queue, Pat, but we do invite our guests to ask either a verbal question. If you'd like to ask a verbal question, just type "I have a verbal question" in the chat box there, and you will go to the top of the list if there are several questions in the queue. If you don't have a microphone and would still like to ask a question, please feel free to type the question in. And you can ask questions about the program. Pat will, I'm sure, be happy to answer those questions, and either Gordon or Timo will answer any questions you might have about the technical content that was covered during each of their segments. And do hope that folks will take us up on the invitation to ask questions. Pat, is there anything special about this program that you could say compared to other ETCA conferences? Anything that's significantly different?
Well, I think the overall program this year, I'm really pleased. We have a great program committee, and I would say also this year having Hanno Basse talk from a Fox perspective about the importance of the internet is a great thing. And Microsoft talking about the cloud, I think, is another highlight. So we've got 2 great keynote speakers. I would remind the audience also, given that this conference is designed to be interactive, we have not only networking sessions, but every panel we leave time for questions to make sure people are getting the issues they're concerned about addressed in the conference. That's been a long-standing tradition. But I think this program is very solid from beginning to end. So, and I guess the one thing this year, we haven't decided yet. We may end up having a reception on the first evening at Microsoft, so it would provide additional time for folks to network over refreshments, as it were. Very big thing in Silicon Valley, as many of you know, who are out here.
And that is a big component of these types of events, is the opportunity to network with people that you may or may not necessarily have the opportunity to do so. We still have no questions, so either people are slow typers or there are no questions. So I think we should probably say thank you to our speakers, Pat Griffiths, Gordon Castle, and Timo Kunkel. Thank you to our guests. We will post this video online, and you can come back and review some of the technical information that was covered that went by at the speed of light. And you can also refer your friends to the video so that they also can learn a little bit about the entertainment technology in the Connected Age conference. So thank you very much. Safe travels.
I will mention one last thing, Joel, before folks leave, as a thank you for sticking it out until the end. We do have a special discount code for attendees of this webcast. We know who you are. And if you go to register on the SMPTE website and type in ETCA, Entertainment Technology in the Connected
That's
Age,
what I said.
ETCA and 100, you'll receive a $100 discount for attending at the conference. So some important stuff to remember. So that's ETCA 100 when it asks you for the promotion code. And with that, I thank you. I hope to see you all in Mountain View, and have a great day.
Thank you, everybody. Take care.
Bye.